Hey, what's up guys, back again with another video in the Spigot series. This time I'm going to show you how to make custom configurations.
Love how I fall fast, 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 love how I fall fast.
Alright guys, so like I said, we're going to make custom configurations, meaning, like before we made the config.yml file, and then we could take some data from the file, and then also change the data, and stuff like that. It's very useful for storing data and, keeping track of some things. But what I'm going to show you how to do is make your own configuration files, because sometimes you don't want to have just the regular configuration.yml file. You want to have like a different one, maybe so you can store different data on players or for something else, right? So it's very common within plugins, so that's why I'm going to show you. It's been requested many times. I've seen in the comments and stuff like that, so I'm going to show you. And yeah, so you can either use it to store a configuration, like you can get data for something, or you can just store data for later use. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing, but yeah. So what we're going to do here is first make the project. So let's just go ahead and call it custom config plugin. Pretty simple. Okay, and then I'm going to give it a package name. Me.Illuminati Productions. Alright, cool. So now we have all that. We'll just skip that, and then we'll make the name here. So we'll just say custom config plugin, and that's all we need. So we're going to finish this, and then we're going to click import, whatever comes up here. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. It's so slow. Hurry up. Oh my gosh. Hurry up. Let's go. Now we do enable auto import. There we go. And so now everything is going to auto import for us, Maven and all that stuff and all that magical stuff. So we're going to open all this up. Let's see what we got here. Now we have our custom config plugin.java, which is our main, basically our main class for our plugin here. And so the first thing you want to do whenever you're working with a custom configuration file, I mean, there's many things, like there's many different variations of what you can do. So we need to either load in the file if it exists already, or we need to generate the file if it doesn't exist already. And so there's a bunch of little methods that we're going to need to do all of that, right? To generate, reload the config file, save the config file, do all that stuff, right? So what I recommend you do, just for structure, is make all of your custom configuration files inside of a custom class. Okay, so you can manage those configuration files in their corresponding classes, right? So what I'm going to do is make a new package here. Okay, it's going to be called files. I just call it files, and then inside of here I'll have all the classes for whatever custom configuration files I want to have. Okay, so in this case I'll call it custom config file. I'll just leave it custom config, that's fine. So what this is going to do is serve as my file that's going to be, or my class that's going to be able to run the methods for my configuration file, like saving the file and generating the file and all that fun stuff, okay? So that's going to do all of that for us, pretty simple. And so let's also make a new package here. It's going to be a commands package. So we're going to be testing out this, configuration file with a command in a second, once we get everything sorted out. So we're going to call this command message, that's fine, something simple, just for testing purposes, okay? So the first thing we want to do is go back to our custom config file, is actually make the configuration for the file, okay? And so what we need to do here is open this up, and so we're going to need two things. We're going to need a actual file object from the Java, language, and then also we need a file configuration object, which is going to be part of the, the Spigot language, okay? So we're going to do private static, and you'll see why it's static in a second. I'll show you. File, okay? So this is going to be a simple file object. We can import that from Java.io. Pretty simple. Then now we need a private static, and then we need a file configuration, okay? And file configuration, as you can see, is imported from Bukkit, or, Spigot, same thing pretty much at this point. So that's where that comes from, but this one of course is from Java itself. Alright, so now we're going to call this one custom file. And so the difference between these two is this one, the first one here, is actually going to be the file that we're importing directly from our our folder. We're going to be able to import the custom configuration file directly from the plugins folder, and then we're going to take that file object and then convert it to the file configuration object, so we can actually edit it and stuff like that with Java, of course, because like whenever we have a config.yml, which we haven't generated one yet, whenever we have one, we're able to, do a bunch of methods on that configuration file to, get data, save data, add defaults, all stuff like that, okay? Create sections, a bunch of stuff, right? So once we convert it to a file configuration object, we're going to be able to do that for us, okay? So now that we have those two things, we're going to need to have a method here, okay? And this method, we'll call it setup. So what this is going to do is set up our custom configuration file. And we're going to run this method every time our plugin starts up, so that it can find the file or generate the file. You'll see in a second, okay? So it's going to be a public modifier because we want we want every class in this plugin to be able to access the setup method, of course, because like I said, we're going to be running this every time the plugin starts up. So it's public static void and setup. And the reason this is static is because we can run this method without having to generate a custom config object. Okay, of course that's how static works. You don't have to make an object to run a method or use a variable, right? So anyway, so we're gonna make this a method here. So we're gonna open this up here. And so the first thing we want to do is get an instance of the file that we have here. Okay, so we're gonna gather that, like I said, from the actual folder. So we need to go inside the folder and find the custom file, right? So file is equal to new file. So we're generating a new file object. And so inside of here, we need to get the actual file. So first, let's get the folder where we can find the file. So we can do that with bucket.getServer .getPluginManager.getPlugin, and now we put the name of the plugin inside of here. We'll call it, or we already know what it's called. It's called custom config plugin. So custom config plugin, and then finally we need get data folder. So this is going to get the data folder for your plugin. Okay, so yeah, so that's what that's going to do, and I'll show you what that means in a second whenever we actually look at the configuration file, whenever we test it out. And so that now that we have the file in which we can find the custom configuration file, we need to get the actual name of the configuration file itself, right? So in this case, we'll just call it, we can name it whatever we want, by the way. We're just going to call it customconfig.yml and make it a YML file, by the way. That's very important for what we're doing here. So now what we're going to do is check and see if that file actually exists, because we could actually be gathering a file that doesn't even exist yet, right? This file cannot even exist, or it may actually exist. So what we need to do is check and see if that's the case. So file.exist, so this is going to check and see if it exists. So what we're going to do is make it so we're going to check and see if it does not exist, okay? So if it does not exist, then we want to do whatever is inside of here, right? So what we're going to do here is do file.createNewFile, right? So what this is going to do, pretty much obviously, is if the file does not exist yet, it's going to create the new file that we want to exist, right? Pretty simple, right? And it already knows what to name it, of course, because we told it here what to name it, right? So we have an error here because it says unhandled exception, because we're dealing with Java IO and all that, input output. So we need to handle this exception just in case it ever happens, right? So we're going to move this, put it inside of here. We're going to catch that IO exception E, and we could just leave this blank. Yeah, okay, so whatever you want to put in there, that's fine. And so this will happen. So all of this will happen, like I said, if the file does not exist, right? It's going to generate the file if the file does not exist, because up here it's looking for the file, and so this is going to be able to tell us if it found it or not, right? Now that it either found the file or generated the file, we can actually get an instance of the file to be edited, right? Because like I said, with this object here, we can actually edit the file. So we need to convert this file to this file, right? Or this object to this object. So we could do it like this. We could do custom file. That's what we named it up here. See, custom file. So custom file is equal to YML configuration dot load configuration, and now we just plug in file just like that. So what this is going to do, like I said, is allow us to edit the file. So let me show you. So we can do custom file dot, and then now we can do all the stuff that we can do usually with a regular config. We can get the strings. So if we have a string stored inside of our file, we can get the string and its path and all that, and we can do all the magical stuff, right? So that'll be cool in a second whenever we start working with the file. So pretty much all this method did was set up the file by either finding the file or generating it. Really simple, okay? So finds or generates the custom config file, right? That's pretty much what that does. And so now let's go ahead and add some more methods, okay? So there's another method that we're going to want here. It's called get. That's what I'm going to call it, at least. And what it's going to allow us to do is get an instance of this custom file variable or object here in any of our classes here, so we can actually access the custom file within our classes, right? Because of course, if we have a custom configuration file, we want to be able to access that custom configuration anywhere, so we can use the values inside of it, right? So we want to, since it's private here, we want to create a custom getter, right? You know, getters and setters. If you know anything about object-oriented programming, you can use that to access a private variable, right? So we're going to do that pretty simple. So we're going to do public static. So the reason these are static, by the way, is because if we make a static method that uses a variable, the variable that it's using has to be static also, okay? So you're going to get an error if this was not static, right? So that's what that is for. So we're going to call void get. So this is going to be able to get an instance of our custom file object, right? So that's what that's going to do. So we can open this up and we can simply return custom file. So that's all it's doing, is just returning an instance of that file. So it says cannot return a value from a method with a void type result. So what does that mean? Oh, right. It's not void because of course we're actually returning something. So what we need to do is, you know, actually specify the return type. So in this case, it's going to be this object or this class here, right? So file configuration, oops, not that one. There we go. Okay, so now that we have that, we can actually get an instance of the custom file within any of our classes, because of course this is public, right? So that's what that's going to do. And so we have two more methods that we want. So the next one is going to be our save method, and this is simply going to save our config file whenever we want to, okay? So we can call upon this method whenever we want to save it for some reason, right? In case we edit it with a command or something like that, we could save it, right? So public, and it's better to type all these out so you have access to them whenever you want to, okay? So public static void save, okay? And so it's going to save everything. So we're going to do custom file.save, so that's simply going to save it. And we want to save it to what file? We want to save it to the file here, okay, right? Because it's going to be saving it to the file that we have here, because this is an actual representation of the file within our file structure, right? So what that's going to do is take it from the file configuration object and then save it back into its regular file form, right? Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So what we're going to do here is cut this and do try, because we need to handle this exception, of course. So try catch IO exception E, and we'll simply do we'll say something like we cannot save your file, right? So we could do we'll just do output couldn't save file, right? There we go. So that's what that's going to do if it cannot save it, and that's all you need, really. That's all you need to save the file, okay? So now we're going to have the final method here, and this is going to be the simple reload method. So this is going to be the method that you want to call whenever you edit the configuration file manually within, your computer, your text editor, and then you save it, but you need to reload it because, of course, your plugin is not going to know that you just changed the file, the actual file, so you want to reload it so all this, happens all over again, right? It's going to actually reload it for you, basically, okay? You'll see in a second. I'll be able to demonstrate that for you. So public static void reload. So that's simply going to reload it. Custom file is equal to YML configuration dot load configuration. So it's basically just going to reload it, right? It's going to set the custom file equal to the new version of the load configuration of file, just like that. So it's going to do all of that for us, and that's all it's going to do, right? So hopefully this all makes a good amount of sense for you. It's all going to make more sense as, the more you practice and all that fun stuff, right? So now let's actually get to demonstrating how this would work, okay? So let's go back into our main class here. And so in our main class, the first thing you're going to want to do whenever you're loading our custom configuration file is actually set up the file, right? So we could do custom config dot setup, just like that, and that's going to set up our file, right? It's going to generate the file or find the file for us, right? So once we set it up, now we want to do usually what we do with the regular configuration file and save its defaults and all that fun stuff, right? So we could do custom config file, or custom config dot get, so we can actually get an instance of that file. So get dot options, so this is going to do the options, and it's going to copy the defaults. So what this is going to do is go through the file if it found the file and just copy what's already in the file so that our plugin knows what's in it, right? It's pretty simple. We have already done this with the regular configuration file. And then now what we're going to do is do custom config dot save, right? So it's going to save the file for us, right? So one thing I want you to keep in mind is whenever you create a custom configuration file, you cannot set a custom configuration file manually, right? You can't create the file inside of here and then have it generated by your plugin, right? You can't do that. You can only do that with the regular config file. So basically you have to set the defaults of the configuration file if you want it to have defaults, meaning, for example, right, whenever you go inside your plugin and you add this plugin to your server, right, and you reload your server, you're going to expect the server to generate the the configuration file, right? Because we're setting it up here, we're going to expect it to generate that file. But that file is going to be blank, right? Because we haven't set the file to have any values inside of it, right? So usually inside of our plugin, we can create a config.yml that's going to have all the default values that we want to load for the first time. And so we can do that with a regular config file, but we cannot do that with a custom config file. So to be able to do that with a custom config file, we need to actually run methods upon the config file so that we can, generate some defaults. So for example, let me show you. So custom config.get, so we can get the file itself, .add defaults. So this is how we add defaults, okay? So we can do string path, so this is going to be the name of the first value. So let me show you. So this is a custom configuration file I just made real quick. And so let's say we have one here. It's going to be called, we'll call it taco, and then on the other side we have a string, right? So this is going to be our path, and this is going to be our value, okay? That's how configuration files work. So of course you would use single quotes actually in this case, but you get the point, right? So what we want to do here is create a path. So this is going to be taco. And so now we need a object here, so it can be any value, right? Because Of course, whenever you're using config.ymls, you can have any value. You can have booleans, strings, stuff like that, right? So we're going to have taco, and the taco is going to have a value of rice, anything like that. So what that is going to do is whenever it creates the file for the first time, it's going to generate the file, but inside the file it's going to have these two values here. Okay, so that's pretty cool, right? So that's what that's going to do. That's going to allow you to have default values if you ever want to do that, okay? So let's say that you actually go inside the file once it's generated for the first time and you see taco and rice, right? If you change the value of rice, it's not going to basically override that value next time you load up the plugin, okay? It's going to know that you have this default already set. It's going to look at taco and say, okay, you already have taco, so we don't need to set the value to rice. So it's able to know if you change the default or not. So you don't have to worry about that, basically, okay? But if you change the name of taco, if you change the path or taco, then it's going to have to regenerate taco and rice, right? Hopefully that makes sense. I'll be able to show you in a second. So we're almost ready to test this plugin out. But the first thing we want to do is actually generate a regular config.yml, because basically, if you know, a regular config.yml is going to be able to generate the actual folder for your plugin, right? Because whenever you have a, let me show you actually. So basically right here, we can see that we have this plugin here, and also this plugin has its own little folder here where we can store our config.yml and our custom file.yml. So basically, our custom file.yml is not going to be able to generate this folder here for this plugin, okay? Only our regular config.yml is going to be able to generate this folder for our plugin, okay? And so if you have this, let's say I didn't create a config.yml for this plugin, right? That means that this folder would never be made, okay? So that means that this custom file.yml would never be made also. So what I'm trying to say here is that to create a custom file, a custom configuration for your plugin, you also need to have a regular config.yml, unless inside of your code you create the folder manually, okay? So yeah, that's what we need to do. We need to create a regular config.yml with our plugin like we just did here. And so we're going to give it, you don't even have to give it a value if you don't want to, I believe. We're just going to do that for testing purposes. We're going to call it booty yes, okay? So that's what we're going to put in there. You don't have to put anything in there, I believe. You can just leave it blank, pretty simple. But what we want to do here is now generate our configuration plugin a configuration file, of course. So we can do, let's say setup config, and now we can do git config dot options dot copy default. So that's basically the same thing we're doing here. Pretty simple, right? You can see that they're very similar. So once we copy the defaults, we want to save it, of course, and that's also what we did here, okay? But of course here we had to make our own custom methods, but in this case, since we're using a the regular config, it already has methods built in inside of Spigot just to generate and save and all that stuff, the custom config, the regular config, right? So anyway, so now that we've done that, we've generated a regular config and a custom config. We can now get to work, so we can test this out probably now, okay? I don't think we need to register anything yet because we haven't made the command. We're not using the command yet. We're just going to generate these config files. So anyway, so now we're going to go to Maven, and then we're just going to generate our plugin here. So now that it looks like it compiled, so what we're going to do here is go to our target. That's not the right one, so we need to go here, right click this, and then do show in Explorer, and then we can go to target, and now we can copy our plugin that we just created, and now we can go back to our plugins here. And now let's close our server real quick. We're just going to get rid of these two folders. We don't need these. And so we're going to paste our new plugin inside of here, and we're going to start up our server. And let's watch what happens whenever this server starts up. We can see that a new folder is going to be generated, of course, because we have a regular config file. Because of course, like I said, the regular config file is the file that generates the folder for us, okay? So anyway, let's wait for this to work out. So as you can see here, our server started up, and we also have a custom config plugin folder now, right? So we can look inside this folder, and then boom, as you can see here, we have a regular config which has booty yes inside of it, and then we have our custom config here. And as you can see here, it says taco rice, of course, because those are the two default values that we told it to add, right? So that's pretty cool, right? So hopefully you like that. We were able to make a custom config file. Awesome, right? So let's test it out so we can play around with this so I can show you how it works, basically. So like I said, whenever it's adding the defaults here, it knows that as long as you don't change the path here, it won't reload this default, okay? So let me show you what I mean. So if we go to our folder here, we can, we can actually edit this custom YML file, right? We can change rice to anything we want to. We can change it to, let's change rice to beef, and we'll save this file. And then now we're going to reload our plugin, right? So you would think that maybe this folder would be overridden, but it's not going to be overridden. It's able to save it, and then now taco is still equal to beef, even though we just restarted the server, basically, okay? So it knows that that default has been overridden, and so we're good to go, okay? So anyway, so now the difference is that if we change taco, the path for it, then it's going to override that value. So let me show you what I mean. So we're going to change this to tree. So and we're going to save this, and now we're going to reload our plugin again. Let me show you what happens. And now, as you can see here, the taco rice value is added on top of it, of course, because now, since we changed the value of taco to tree, taco doesn't exist anymore, right? So what happens here, it looks for taco and it doesn't find taco anymore. So now it's going to regenerate taco and also its value of rice, right? So basically it's going to do that every time the plugin reloads and stuff like that, okay? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So anyway, let's actually test out, the plugin, right? So we can, do some stuff with it. So we're going to do that with the message command here. So we're going to do implements command executor. So return true. And we'll go back here to our main class here, and we're going to get rid of this taco rice thing. We don't really need this. Actually, we'll make something different. We'll say taco rice. Instead of that, we'll have message. So this is going to be message. And then the regular message, we're going to have this. We're going to say this is the default message, okay? Pretty cool. So this is message and this is default message, okay? So this is going to be what's generated inside of our configuration file the first time it loads up, basically. So let's get rid of all this crap. We don't need this anymore. Let's get rid of this. Okay, so it's going to be regenerated with these two values here, okay? So now we can go inside of our message command and actually try accessing the value of message, right? Message being the value here. So we can access that value by doing, let's see. Well, first we need to actually, check and see if the player's instance of, or Cinder's instance of player, just like that. And then now we'll get, let's import player. Then we'll do player, oh my gosh, is equal to player, Cinder like that. And so now we'll send the player a message. So player.send message, and let's say we want to access the custom config that we generated and access the value of message, right? So we can do that like this. So we can do custom config, which is the class for our configuration file, .get, so we can get an instance of that file. And now we can do get string, so we can get the string value of one of the, the path that we want. In this case, of course, we named it message here. So message, now we can go here and do message, right? So what this should do is send the player a message of whatever is stored inside of this value, right? Or inside of this path, right? So that should work. So now we need to register the command here inside of our main class, right here. So we can do get command. What do we call it? Message. We'll just make it lowercase, right? I cannot type. I type like a retard. New. All right. So there we go. So now we're gonna generate. Oh wait, no, we need to change our config.yml. So commands, let's see here, message, description, sends, sends a message from the config. Alright, finally, we got that done. So now let's start up our plugin and reload it and everything for us so we can test it out. Alright, so we're going to copy this here, we're going to go back here, and then we're going to go back here, and we're going to paste this and override the first plugin. And then now we can go inside of here and reload. So reload. So now it's going to regenerate our custom configuration file because we deleted it, right? So let's see what we have inside of here. And now, of course, it says message. This is a default message because that's what we set it to have. So that's awesome. That worked perfectly. So now let's go back to our server and see if that all worked out. If we can actually run the message command. Okay, so we're inside of our server here. So let's try message. So message. And it says, boom, this is the default message. So it worked perfectly, right? Hopefully you like that. That's pretty awesome, right? So now we can access configuration files, our custom configuration files at least. And then so now let's try setting a custom configuration file, right? Let's try doing that. So if you ever worked with plugins before, if you ever made a server and worked with plugins, you can see that some plugins have a reload command, right? So what that's going to allow the plugin to do is whenever you go inside of the configuration file for that plugin and change the value of whatever's inside of that configuration file, you can go back inside of your server and do slash whatever your plugin's name and then reload, right? And so what that's going to do is reload the configuration file of your plugin onto the server so that we have all the new values added to our server, basically. So let's try all of that out with the reload method that we actually worked with inside of our configuration file class, right? So we'll go back here and we're going to make a new command here. We'll call it reload command. So this is going to reload the configuration for our custom configuration file, right? So implements command executor, and what this is going to do is we did something wrong, I think. Let's see. We should have, oh, never mind. We just need to generate the method here. So public on command return true. And we're just going to skip the part where we check and see if Cinder is an instance of player. Who cares? You don't even need to do that in this case because our console should be able to do this command also. So we'll simply do player is equal to player. So now that the player ran this command, we can actually call upon the reload method inside of our custom configuration file so that it reloads the file. Okay, so we can do that. So we can simply do custom config dot reload, and that's all you need to do to reload it. That's some pretty simple stuff, but that's what that's going to do. So now let's go ahead and register this command so we can test it out. So we'll do git command, and we'll just call it preload for plugin reload, and we'll set the executor to new reload command. And so now we need to. So now we'll add it to our plugin.yml. And so we need to add it here. So we'll call it pre-reload. Description reloads the config for the plugin. And of course the indentation right here is kind of wonky. It's not lined up correctly, so we just put a tab right there. So now we're just going to reload our plugin so we can regenerate and recompile it and all that fun stuff. So we're going to go back here to our target. We're going to copy this and we'll go back here. Then we'll delete this custom config. Well, actually we don't need to delete it. Whatever it has inside of it is fine. We never change anything. So now we can reload the plugin itself by overriding it and doing /reload. And that's going to do all that for us. So now we can go back inside of our plugin and do /message, and as you can see here, message still works. So now let's test out the reload command. Okay, so we'll do /p reload, and nothing happens. So we can assume that it worked correctly. Let's see, we don't have any errors, right? No errors. That's pretty good. So that means that it probably worked. So we'll do /message again, and we get the same thing, right? Because we never actually changed anything inside of our configuration file, right? So now let's do that. Let's go back inside of our configuration file, and we'll go back to here, and let's change the value of this, right? So let's change the message to Cody is cool, right? So then we'll save that, and then now we'll go back inside of here, and then now we'll do /message, but it says the same thing, right? So now what we need to do is reload it, of course, right? So we need to reload it by doing /p reload. So now that's going to reload the configuration file since we just changed it. So now we can do /message, and now it has the new message for us. Cody is cool. So that would be an instance in which you would use the configuration reload command, right, or the method, right? So that's pretty cool. Hopefully you understand that a little better. So hopefully that makes sense. Whenever you want to reload something, you would just call upon the reload method inside of your custom configuration class, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you want to access your configuration files, you want to generate them and do all that fun stuff, all you need to do is have those 4 methods generated for you. I think there are 4. You have the setup method, the get method, the save method, and the reload method. You just need all those methods, and then you'll pretty much be good to go, right? And then if you want to, you can save some defaults for your plugin configuration. And then also, of course, I showed you how to get the data inside the configuration files by doing the .get method, and then you can do get string or whatever you want to do to get whatever corresponding value that you want to get, right? And so one thing I didn't show you is how to set the values of a configuration file, but I don't need to because I already showed you how to do that in past episodes. So you're pretty much good to go at this point. If you have any questions about what I showed you today, I'm sure you have a lot of questions maybe because I went kind of fast and I'm pretty horrible at explaining stuff. So if you have any questions at all, you can ask in the comment section below. I'll be glad to help you. So yeah, if you have any questions, do that. Also, we have a Discord link in the description below, so if you want to check out our Discord, make sure you look at the link below, check it out, join it and all that fun stuff, okay? Also, one more thing, all of the code from today's episode is in the description below, so make sure you check that out, bookmark it for future reference and all that fun stuff, because I know this is probably something you might forget. I'm definitely going to forget it at some point, so you want to be able to save the code that you have for future use, right? So anyway, if you like this episode, leave a like if you want to see more, subscribe, and peace.